Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The soft glow of the hotel room lamp cast long shadows across the plush carpet as I stood before the full-length mirror, scrutinizing every detail of my appearance. My heart raced, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through my veins. Tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't just playing a role. I was embracing a part of myself I'd kept hidden for so long. The silky fabric of the deep blue dress fit my body, accentuating the feminine figure I'd carefully cultivated. My fingers trembled slightly as I adjusted the blonde wig, ensuring each strand fell perfectly into place. The woman staring back at me from the mirror was Ilana, confident, alluring, and ready to step into the world. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. This wasn't just another night out as Ilana. This was a meeting that could change everything. The ping of an incoming email on my phone startled me from my reverie. I picked it up, my pulse quickening as I saw the sender's name, George. His message was brief, but it sent a thrill through me. Looking forward to meeting you, Ilana. Room 712, 8 p.m. sharp. I glanced at the clock, 7:45 p.m. It was time. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt interminable. Each ding of a passing floor echoed my racing heartbeat. I couldn't help but replay the events that had led me here. It had started innocently enough, a blog post, a confession to the world about my double life. I never expected anyone to take notice, let alone reach out. But George had. His email had been intriguing, respectful, and undeniably interesting. He wanted to meet Ilana, to know her without the burden of my male identity. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a long, carpeted hallway. My heels sunk into the plush fabric as I made my way down the corridor, each step bringing me closer to room 712. Closer to George. I paused outside the door, my hand hovering over the polished wood. Was I ready for this? To let someone see this side of me, in person, without the safety net of anonymity. Before I could second-guess myself further, I rapped my knuckles against the door. 3 sharp knocks that seemed to echo in the empty hallway. For a moment, there was silence. Then the sound of footsteps approaching from the other side. The click of a lock disengaging. And finally, the door swung open. George stood before me, a warm smile gracing his features. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair that spoke of wisdom beyond his years. His eyes, a striking shade of green, widened slightly as they took me in. "Ilana," he breathed, his voice a rich baritone. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined." I felt a blush creep across my cheeks, the compliment catching me off guard. "Thank you, George. It's wonderful to finally meet you in person." He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Please, come in. Make yourself comfortable." The hotel room was spacious and elegantly appointed. A sitting area near the window offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, twinkling lights stretching as far as the eye could see. George had arranged a small table near the window, complete with a chilled bottle of champagne and 2 flutes. "I hope you don't mind," he said, following my gaze. "I thought we might enjoy a drink while we talk." I smiled, some of my nervousness ebbing away. "That sounds lovely." George moved to the table, his movements graceful and self-assured. He poured 2 glasses of champagne, the bubbles dancing in the soft light. Handing me a flute, he raised his own in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. The champagne was crisp and refreshing, its effervescence matching the butterflies in my stomach. We settled into the comfortable chairs by the window, the city sprawling out beneath us like a glittering tapestry. "So, Ilana," George began, his voice warm and inviting. "Tell me about yourself. Your blog posts were fascinating, but I want to hear it from you directly." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. How much should I reveal? How much did I dare to share? "Well," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. As you know from my blog, I live a unique life. By day, I'm who society expects me to be, a man with all the trappings and expectations that come with it. But Alana, she's who I am when I'm true to myself." George nodded, his expression thoughtful.
"And how long have you been living this dual life?"
"It feels like forever," I admitted, surprised by my own candor. "I've always known there was more to me than what people saw on the surface, but it wasn't until a few years ago that I found the courage to explore this side of myself."
"That must have been challenging,"
George said, his voice laced with genuine empathy. "To keep such an integral part of yourself hidden for so long." I nodded, taking another sip of champagne. The alcohol was beginning to work its magic, loosening my tongue and calming my nerves.
It still is in many ways, but embracing Alana has also been incredibly liberating."
George leaned forward, his eyes alight with interest.
"How so?" "When I'm Alana, I feel whole," I explained, gesturing with my free hand. "It's like I'm finally allowing all the pieces of myself to come together. I'm not constrained by society's expectations or gender norms. I'm just me."
A soft smile played on George's lips.
"That's beautiful, Elena, truly. Not many people have the courage to be so honest with themselves."
His words warmed me, more potent than the champagne coursing through my veins. For so long, I'd feared judgment, rejection. But here was someone who seemed to understand, who wanted to know the real me. "What about you, George?" I asked, eager to shift the focus away from myself for a moment. "What made you reach out after reading my blog?" George leaned back in his chair, swirling the champagne in his glass thoughtfully.
"I've always been fascinated by the complexity of human identity," he said. "When I came across your blog, I was struck by your honesty, your vulnerability. It's rare to find someone so open about their journey of self-discovery."
He paused, taking a sip of his drink before continuing.
"I suppose I saw a kindred spirit in you, Alana. Someone unafraid to challenge societal norms and live authentically."
His words resonated deeply within me. For so long, I'd felt alone in my journey, isolated by the very thing that made me who I was. To hear someone express not just acceptance, but admiration was profoundly moving. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know to hear that." George reached across the table.
"You're incredibly brave, Alana. Never forget that."
We sat like that for a moment, connected by touch and understanding. The city lights twinkled beyond the window, a silent witness to this unexpected connection. Finally, George pulled his hand away, clearing his throat. "I hope I'm not being too forward, but I ordered dinner for us. I thought we might continue our conversation over a meal. If you're comfortable with that, of course." The thought of spending more time with George, of delving deeper into conversation, was irresistible. "I'd love that," I replied with a smile. George's face lit up. "Excellent. I took the liberty of ordering a selection of dishes. I hope you don't mind." "Not at all. I trust your judgment." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. George excused himself to answer it, returning moments later with a waiter pushing a cart laden with covered dishes. The aromas wafting from beneath the silver covers were mouth-watering. The waiter efficiently set the table, arranging the dishes with practiced ease. George tipped him generously, and soon we were alone again, faced with a feast fit for royalty. "This looks amazing," I said, taking in the spread before us. There was a colorful salad, fragrant pasta dishes, and what looked like a perfectly cooked steak. George smiled, clearly pleased by my reaction. "I'm glad you approve. Shall we?" We settled at the table, the cityscape providing a stunning backdrop to our meal. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from our favorite books to our dreams for the future. "So, Ilana," George said as we were finishing our main course, "what do you hope to achieve by sharing your story online?" I paused, fork halfway to my mouth, considering the question. It was something I'd thought about often, but never fully articulated. I suppose I want to show others like me that they're not alone, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. That it's possible to live authentically, even if it doesn't fit into society's neat little boxes. And maybe, in some small way, I can help change people's perceptions about gender and identity. George nodded, his expression thoughtful. A noble goal, and a challenging one, I imagine.
It can be, I admitted. There are days when the negativity, the misunderstanding, it all feels overwhelming. But then I'll get a message from someone saying my words helped them, and it makes it all worthwhile.
You're making a real difference, Ilana. Never doubt that. His words warmed me, chasing away the lingering doubts that often plagued me. We finished our meal in comfortable silence, the clink of cutlery and the distant hum of the city the only sounds. As George poured the last of the champagne into our glasses, he gestured towards the balcony. Would you care to join me outside? The view is spectacular, and I could use a cigarette if you don't mind. I nodded, rising from my seat. That sounds perfect. We stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air a refreshing change from the warmth of the room. The city stretched out before us, a tapestry of lights and shadows. George pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offering me one. I declined with a smile, content to simply breathe in the night air. As George lit his cigarette, the flame briefly illuminated his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the depth of his eyes. He took a long drag, exhaling slowly into the night.
You know, Alana, he began, his voice thoughtful, I can't help but admire your courage. Living a double life, constantly navigating between two identities, it must be exhausting.
I leaned against the railing, looking out over the city.
It can be, I admitted. There are days when I feel like I'm living a lie, no matter which identity I'm presenting, and the fear of being discovered, of losing everything I've built, it's always there, lurking in the background. George turned to face me, his expression serious. Have you ever considered fully transitioning, living as Alana full-time? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. It was something I'd thought about countless times, a dream I'd both cherished and feared.
I've thought about it, I said softly. But the reality is so much more complicated than the fantasy. How so? George prompted gently. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. There's my job to consider. My family, my friends. Some would understand, I'm sure, but others, I could lose everything. And then there's the practical side, the medical procedures, the legal hurdles. It's overwhelming to even think about. George nodded, taking another drag of his cigarette. It's a monumental decision, no doubt. But from what I've seen of you, Alana, you have the strength to face it, if that's what you truly want. His words hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, overwhelmed by the understanding and support radiating from this man I'd only just met. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. It means more than you know to hear that. We stood in companionable silence for a while, watching the city below. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sounds of traffic and distant music. I shivered slightly, the cool air penetrating the thin fabric of my dress. Are you cold? George asked, concern evident in his voice. We can go back inside if you'd like. I shook my head, not ready to leave this moment just yet. I'm fine. It's invigorating, actually. Makes me feel alive. George chuckled softly. I can understand that. There's something about standing above it all, isn't there? Puts things in perspective. I nodded, my gaze sweeping across the glittering expanse of the city. It's like, up here, I can be whoever I want to be. The world below, with all its expectations and judgments, it feels so far away. And who do you want to be, Alana? George asked softly, his eyes searching mine. The question hung in the air between us, laden with possibility. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. I want to be me, all of me, Not divided, not hiding parts of myself, just whole. George nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. That's a beautiful aspiration, and a challenging one. It is, I agreed. Some days it feels impossible, like I'm trying to reconcile two completely separate lives.
What's the hardest part?
George asked, his voice gentle, encouraging. I leaned against the railing, gathering my thoughts. The constant vigilance, I think. Always being aware of how I'm presenting, who I'm talking to, what I'm saying. It's exhausting. Always checking myself, making sure I don't slip up. George stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray on the balcony table. That sounds incredibly draining. How do you manage it? Some days better than others, I admitted with a wry smile. I've developed coping mechanisms over the years, little rituals to help me transition between my identities. But there are still moments when it all feels like too much. Can you tell me about those moments? George asked, his voice laced with genuine curiosity and concern. I closed my eyes, memories washing over me. There was this one time at work. I'd been out as Alana the night before and I was exhausted. I nearly signed an important document with the wrong name. It was a small thing, but it terrified me. Made me realize how fragile this balancing act really is. George nodded sympathetically. That must have been frightening. How did you handle it? I played it off as a joke, I said, shaking my head at the memory. Laughed about how tired I was, how I couldn't even remember my own name. But inside I was panicking, spent the rest of the day double and triple checking everything I did. It sounds like you've become quite adept at maintaining this divide, George observed. But at what cost? His words hit home, forcing me to confront a truth I'd long tried to ignore. The cost, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing myself. If by trying to be both, I'm ending up being neither. George turned to face me fully, his expression serious. That's a heavy burden to bear, Alana. Have you considered talking to someone about it? A professional, perhaps? I shook my head, a rueful smile on my lips. And say what? Doctor, I'm living a double life and I'm afraid I'm losing my mind? It's not exactly something you can bring up in casual conversation.
There are therapists who specialize in gender identity issues, George pointed out gently. They might be able to offer you strategies for coping or help you work through some of these feelings. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. You're right, of course. It's just, taking that step feels so final, you know? Like, once I start down that road, there's no going back.
George's hand found mine on the railing, giving it a reassuring squeeze.
Change is scary, Alana, but sometimes it's necessary for growth, for becoming who we're truly meant to be.
Can I ask you something, George? I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
Of course,
he replied, his tone warm and encouraging. Why did you really want to meet me? I mean, I'm grateful you did, but why? What made you reach out to a stranger living a double life? George was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the city below. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, measured.
I suppose I saw something of myself in your words. Not the specifics of your situation, but the struggle. The desire to be true to oneself in a world that often demands conformity. He turned to face me, his eyes intense in the dim light. I've spent much of my life conforming to others' expectations, Alana. It's only recently that I've started to question that, to explore who I really am beneath the roles I've been playing. When I read your blog, it resonated with me on a level I wasn't expecting. I felt less alone. His confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. I felt a surge of emotion, a mix of gratitude and something deeper, harder to define.
Thank you for sharing that with me, I said softly.
It means a lot to know that my words have had an impact.
George smiled, the expression softening his features.
Thank you for having the courage to share your story in the first place. It's not an easy thing, putting yourself out there like that.
We lapsed into comfortable silence, both lost in our thoughts as we gazed out over the city. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. I shivered slightly, the cool air finally penetrating the warmth of the moment. "Perhaps we should head back inside," George suggested, noticing my discomfort. "It's getting chilly out here." I nodded, reluctant to leave the intimacy of the balcony, but aware of the dropping temperature. We made our way back into the warmth of the hotel room, the sudden shift in atmosphere palpable. As George closed the balcony door behind us, I found myself at a loss. The evening had been wonderful, far exceeding my expectations, but now what? The uncertainty must have shown on my face because George's expression softened with understanding.
"Ilana," he said gently, "I want you to know that I've thoroughly enjoyed our time together this evening. Your company, your conversation, it's been truly enlightening."
Thanks for watching. The rest won't be viewable on YouTube, so check out Patreon if you want more.